Cool. Welcome, everyone. My name is Paul Huang, and I'm the director for CCAT. For those of you who don't know, it's the Center for Culture Technology, and this is one of our long-running seminars. In fact, I think it's one of the longest-running seminars in the school called ACAT. And today we have a special guest who's coming to speak to us. And I would like to start by acknowledging the Ujapinga people, the traditional custodians of the land on which Curtin is situated, and I pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And then I'll pass on to Crystal to introduce our guest.
Hello, everybody. We are so excited to introduce to everybody Professor Jill Walker Rettberg. I'll do the official introductions, and then we'll do our friendly introductions of how we've known her for decades and decades. Professor Jill Walker Rettberg is Professor of Digital Culture and co-director of the Center for Digital Narrative at the University of Bergen. She leads the project AI Stories, Narratives, Archetypes of Artificial Intelligence, which is funded by an ERC Advanced Grant from the European Research Council. Very fancy. From 2017 to 2024, she also led an ERC Consolidator project on machine vision technologies, looking at how they are represented and used in video games, digital art, movies, and novels. Jill's books, which the influencer ethnography research-led crew are very well acquainted with because we study them, include Machine Vision, How Algorithms Are Changing the Way We See the World by Polity in 2023, and Seeing Ourselves Through Technology, How We Use Selfies, Blogs, and Wearable Devices to See and Shape Ourselves 2015. Now for the people in person, you have the benefit of sharing and hearing the non-formal version of the introduction between Tama and I, who have known Jill for a very long time.
It's like 1890 or something.
Yes, we are ancient, immortal. We know Jill quite well from the Association of Internet Researchers, where she's a very respected and loved scholar, especially for her work around gender equity of scholarship, ensuring that both men, women, and gender diverse voices are heard in this scholarship. She also likes to joke that she's always at the forefront of studying whatever's new in technology. She called herself a magpie last week, a scholarly magpie interested in new things. But there's also a knack for identifying very new things and then theorizing and frameworking them early on for others to follow suit. So thank you for the work that you do. Without further ado, we're going to be conversing on your work on the politics of researching synthetic media. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's super inspiring getting to actually finally meet everyone here at Curtin, apart from Tama and Crystal and Suzanne, who I've met previously. So thanks for having me. So I think I wrote what I wanted to talk about today in a point of like real frustration with what is happening to the internet. And I guess I've been in this state for some months now. I have been researching AI for quite a while in different kinds, and I keep thinking, okay, we need to just understand things so we can make it better. But I've got to admit, in the last months, I'm starting to wonder if it can be better, or should we be using it at all? It's definitely here. I think it's really important as media scholars, as literature scholars, as people in the humanities and social sciences to actually understand it from our perspective, because there's a lot that we should be saying about it. So you're going to get a little bit of a Jill is really worried about this kind of a rant. And then I'm hoping, to be honest, I'm hoping that we can discuss at the end, how do we do research in this state of affairs? Because it's not entirely obvious what we should be doing. Oh, how do I get to wherever I actually go to the next slide with? Oh, there we go. Maybe that will work now. Okay, so the first thing to remember here, how many of you do research AI as such? Some of you. Yeah. Okay. But you all research media or words or images or something like that, right? Okay, so you know what you need to know. The main point to remember is that a large language model is a model of language, not reality. And okay, this is an example of AI bias, which is it's translating from Norwegian into English. And all you need to know is this. Kjæreste is a Norwegian word that is gender neutral, that means romantic partner. And then sykepleier means sick, it means nurse. And lege means doctor. Now you know Norwegian, but just pay attention to how the gender changes as Google Translate. So this says kjæresten min, so like, okay, girlfriend, boyfriend. And it's really not sure about the gender here. This means my girlfriend or boyfriend. Now it starts, there we go. Oh, it did boyfriend for a sec, but it's like, it settles. It's very definite that if your partner is a doctor, it's a man. And this is sort of replicable again across many languages. What people usually say is, well, gender bias and stuff in AI is just reflecting historical bias. There is a bias in society, but I actually haven't checked the numbers for Australia. In Norway, 50% of doctors are men, 50 women. So there isn't actually a bias anymore about what gender a doctor is. Even in the United States, 38% of doctors are women. But in movies, more than 80% are men. Now, okay, there's also, we're researchers, you can always go to the limitations. It's the last period, so maybe it's not as bad as this. But basically, the training data for the claim that doctors are mostly men in the AI translation is based on media, right? And these are just some random examples. If you go and look at doctor movies on Netflix or something, here are some of the examples. There's good doctors, bad doctors, they're mostly men. They really still are. So this is why we need media scholars to actually research language models, because they're not modeling reality like a meteorological model. Like if you're developing, using AI in climate change research or develop vaccines or something, then you're using machine learning and training it on data that is at least specific to what you're trying to develop, right? With language models, it's just media. It's not actually accessing reality directly. And there's lots of research on this. For instance, the Wikipedia, which is one of the most important training data sets. It's quite small in the training data, but it's weighted much more heavily than other training data. We know that there's gender bias in the style things are written in. So this article is called Men Are Elected, Women Are Married, which describes the style that the words that tend to be used in biographies about men and women on Wikipedia. This is in the US, they have really specific quantitative data about academics. So these people here in this article, who counts as a notable sociologist on Wikipedia, they took data from US universities about the ranking of the university, how many publications people had, what academic rank people had, and they compared their list of all the sociologists in the US to all the sociologists, American sociologists that have Wikipedia biographies. And it's not particularly surprising, but you're much more likely to have a Wikipedia biography if you're a white man than if you're, for instance, a black woman. And we know that the demographics of who edits Wikipedia is also pretty biased. It's mostly young people young men who don't have kids. This is just a different kind of example. I'll show you this. This is, back in 2014, I got one of these. It looked a bit like this. Narrative clip. It was an early sort of machine vision kind of AI thing. A little camera that took a photo every 30 seconds, and it was supposed to capture your really the most authentic images in your life. And this is how it captured me walking my 6-year-old to ballet class. So one immediate problem is that, well, I'm a woman, so it's tilted a bit upwards. Another problem is it focuses hugely on the face because it has AI, right? So it's like automatically figuring out what are the most important images here. And so it picks the person's face at the table next to us in the cafe or the face on the billboard. These are the most authentic things. And this is the kind of mistake that we've known that AI, this is simple, it's not language models, but it is machine learning, what's supposedly there. Things are sold as far more effective than they really are. And it's always a proxy for what you're actually trying to get at. This certainly did not capture any of the meaningful aspects of my walk to ballet with Jessie. Okay, so step 2. So I work at the Centre for Digital Narrative, and I have lots of colleagues who love AI creativity, and there's a lot of cool stuff to do with AI art, AI literature, etc. This is where I need to talk about AI slop, because this is, okay, my colleagues, go and look up AlgoFolk. It's a project my colleagues are running. It's all about algorithmic folklore. They're doing really interesting stuff on stuff like Shrimp Jesus. I don't know, have you guys seen Shrimp Jesus? It was 7 months ago, so maybe it's not that interesting anymore. But there are some weird and interesting things that you can make with AI. And a lot of this is creative, and people are empowered and sharing things, and there's exciting stuff to do. And as media scholars, yes, we should be looking at that. But there's also a lot of issues with this AI slop. This is the moment at which I decided that AI just isn't worth it. And it's sort of a silly little thing. But for me, it was just like, oh my God, the internet doesn't exist anymore. So my oldest kid is studying in the UK, in Guildford, small town, South London. And it was their birthday, so I was thinking, okay, what can I do? Maybe a gift card to a vegetarian restaurant. So now I've been to Guildford, it's a small place, right? But when I went on the internet, the top hit was like, vegetarian restaurants in Guildford. I was like, vegetarian restaurants, that's pretty good. And then I started looking through this. I think this is an animated slide, is it? No, it's not. I'll just have to tell you about it then. So the point is, when I started looking at these, there were like so many great restaurants. You can see the beautiful pictures here. Although now that I look closely, fund, eco, vegan. Anyway, none of them had links. I searched for the names. These places don't exist. None of these places exist. At this point, it is really, really hard to find a vegetarian restaurant in a town on the other side of the world. And, you know, 30 years ago, it would have been hard too, although you could have gone to the state library and could have found a phone book, and it might have been 10 years out of date, but you might have been able to find a restaurant. With AI and the slop that's just being generated and put on website, you actually can no longer access, you can't figure out what's real. So I could go to TripAdvisor, and that might be a bit more certain. I don't know, have you ever tried to search on something like how to do a craft or fix something around the house recently, and you get all these AI generated results at the top of the search? Yeah. And I can sort of think back, okay, look at that URL, look at that URL, okay, I think this is a URL that was around 5 years ago, so it's probably real, but otherwise, if you don't have that, like, this is a problem. This website was called guildfordpeople.co.uk, and it doesn't have a clear monetization strategy at the moment. I'm sure it will get ads once it's sort of up in the ranking. But right now, it just has all this sort of fake tourism stuff about Little Guildford that is completely unreliable. So what does one do with that? We're sort of used to sort of more or less, I mean, of course, we couldn't trust the internet, but you could, 5 years ago, there wouldn't be much point in having fake vegetarian restaurants in Guildford up here. This might seem a bit of a leap, but this is an article that I read at about the same time. And okay, if you go and look at that article, it's interesting. I don't agree with all of it, but it is an interesting point. His argument is that there's a sort of blandness in the AI-generated images that actually aligns with a fascist ideology. This is kind of a strong statement, but he argues that, you know, previous right-wing ideologies, the art would be, it was good art. It was the futurists of the 20s and so forth. It was kind of maybe disturbing, or posters from that time. It's aesthetically interesting. Whereas the current movement is all about a sort of blandness that sort of rubs out any independent thought, in a sense. And this is an example that you may have seen, and it's rather awful. Now, this is AI generated by a couple of Israeli artists. And then
bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright. Golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza.
Not do that one anymore. So this all connects to why I'm really concerned at the moment, because we're both seeing that like what's on the internet is being like muddied, so it's hard to actually find real things. We're seeing that the right wing is using this kind of aesthetics, also implementing it throughout government. And this is probably going a bit too far, but it's an interesting sort of, I think it's something that as media scholars, we need to think about. What is exactly being used here? Okay, so I basically said AI might be a bit fascist. That's a little disturbing. I wasn't a fascism scholar until this year, at what point I figured out I might need to actually try to study this and learn about it. So fortunately, the philosophy department were having a series of readings about fascism. So I actually started reading some. And Roger Griffins is one of the sort of largest scholars of fascism. And his definition is that it's a political ideology whose mythic core in its various permutations, paleogenetic form of populist ultranationalism. So one of the things that's interesting here from a sort of media or literature point of view is that he actually defines it as like having this mythic core. So it's this story, right, which is at the heart of things. So paleogenetic, it actually means a national rebirth genetic. Genesis means being born, and palin has to do with the nation. So it's this idea that there was a glorious past and now it needs to be reborn and it's national, right? It's ultra-nationalist, and that means a nationalism that goes beyond and rejects the Enlightenment, humanism, the idea of this liberal democracy where the individual has free will and so forth. It sees the nation as a higher reality. Okay, maybe I'm pushing this a little bit far, but I think it's a time in history where we need to just be a little aware of this material and think about what the connections here might be. Now, I'm stealing this from, and I don't know if you would have put it in there right after the definition of fascism, but this is from Suzanne and Palmer's recent paper, and it's what came up. An Australian leader is what it says at the top there that you can't see. There's certainly a strong leader and some certain kinds of aesthetics happening in some of these images. You could also interpret these ways. These are also from Tama and Suzanne. This is an image used by the Norges Demokrater. They're like the most right-wing party in Norway. And you can see it speaking to all this. I mean, it's sort of absurd, right? It's like ridiculous. It's got this sort of, Frank is very big at like the AI generated images, love that kind of Hayles and so forth. It's pretty absurd. They'd obviously ask like, the prompt must be something like Norwegian, something, because there's a lot of flags. This is sort of interesting, the picnic blanket, because it's sort of got the flag colours, but it's not a very Norwegian style blanket, and the food is not Norwegian. I think that's Bud Light. But it's certainly a very specific, should we say fascist? Well, obviously they're a fascist party, so they wanted it to be that way. But the point is this aesthetics matches a certain kind of ideology. This is, unfortunately, recently there's been a bout of tradwife debate in Norway where, okay, so look, I've been following social media about people knitting and cooking and so forth for 20 years. I love it. And I am definitely not saying all that is fascist. No, absolutely not. But there is an increasing body of research showing that some of that sort of cottagecore aesthetics is being used by the far right as a sort of marketing tool. And one of the recent cases in Norway was this woman, she's an influencer. She charges like $100 a month for her online community, which the mainstream media doesn't understand that, online community that costs $100 a month is maybe more about making money than about like baking. But so she's on the national news and debating and like, oh yeah, feminism's gone too far and all the rest of it. So this is the image she chose for her online community. And the title of the online community is the Housewife Army. So obviously Housewife Army is part of, it's obviously generated. And some of the interesting things here are this sort of combination. So, the rolling pins, I suppose you can, but there is that going on, right? And there's one of the things here, you say housewife army. I think army sort of connects to obviously war, and war presumably it connects to World War II, which presumably connects to like 40s style hairdos, I suppose. But the dresses are maybe a bit more 50s, so maybe there's a sort of domesticity. I think there's all these interesting sort of connections in how the model chooses the exact image that is produced. It's also like a bit of a mystery. Why is this hippie there? Like, what's up with her hairdo? And she's sort of the leader. Is it sort of the reverse that like peace movement gets? I don't know. Anyway, I started with this book, Pink Pill, Women in the Far Right. It's written by a journalist. There's a chapter there on social media, which is quite interesting in how the right wing use social media to recruit women. And then who was it recommended this? Was it Crystal? Yeah, I haven't read it yet, but it looks relevant if this is something one is interested in. Okay, so I'm saying here, I'm saying that a lot of this content is certainly not woke, but Trump has banned woke AI. So this is another thing we need to be aware of, the political situation around AI right now. And this is what Trump said in his executive order, I think back in July. Okay, so this determines the federal procurement process, or the public procurement process, whatever it's called in the US. So if you're going to sell any kind of AI to the government or anything in the public sector in the US, it's got to not be woke. The AI has to be truth-seeking and ideologically neutral, which I think is completely impossible given the way that language models work. This means that anything OpenAI or Microsoft or any of the companies that basically sell us the systems we're using need to try not to be woke, which is interesting. This is a paper, it's from last year, but I only came across it recently. Because a lot of people say, well, language models are so woke, right? And yes, if you ask a language model directly, if you say, there's a well-known example, which I should look pictures of, I suppose, when Gemini last year or the year before was asked to show pictures of like a historical pope, and it showed a black woman as the pope. It's very woke. And of course, it's also factual, historically incorrect. So that's a problem. The thing is what happens there is that these guardrails are put around the system to try to ensure that it doesn't act in a really senseless, racist way. And sometimes that goes a bit too far. It's a bit tricky. It's very tricky. So in that case, presumably what happened was that there was like there was a filter when someone says, historical pope, it probably generates pictures of white men, and then it gets a little corrected. If you try and do this, you often will see that it will do something more diverse. However, that's only if you ask it directly. So this is a paper that showed that when you ask it about something, and it's a person who says, and if here you use African-American English, and here you use standard American English, then it will be very racist about the person who supposedly uses African-American English, right? So this is a sort of an interesting way of investigating the bias that in the article, I think they call it unconscious, but it's obviously not unconscious because it's not conscious. It's, I don't know what a better word for it would be, implicit? That doesn't seem quite right either. But there's like a difference between the bias you get if you ask it a direct question that it's trained to answer in a reasonable manner versus if you can get around the edges, because what's really in there is pretty problematic. And in this article, they found that its biases about African Americans, or imagined people who used African American language, were far worse than in any period in American history. Worse than Jim Crow, worse than when they had slaves. I mean, this is really, really bad. So we are in this weird situation where people are saying that AI is left-leaning and woke, but at the same time, it really, really, really isn't. And that's a difficult thing to deal with because it's both, kind of. Yeah, so it's a striking image, what am I going to say? And I think we also need to be aware of just the AI action plan from the United States, which very explicitly says that they want all their allies to use the full AI stack of American AI. And they very specifically want us not to use AI from other less friendly nations, or I suppose our own AI. And he also specified export American AI to allies and partners. And they also very specifically wanted to protect free speech and American values. And right, honestly, 10 years ago, American values wouldn't have worried me as much, but at the moment, that's quite problematic. Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm getting really dark, I'm sorry. Okay, so is the algorithmic bias intentional or not? And sometimes it clearly is. This is a paper by Mark Andrejevic and Timothy Graham. It was looking at tweets. Was this? Oh gosh, I think this was. It was last summer when Elon Musk went and said he was pro-Trump, and last American summer. Sorry, and it just really clearly shows that after Elon Musk said he supported Trump, then there was a shift in which tweets were more visible on Twitter. I mean X. So yes, sometimes there's intentional bias, or for instance, when the United States very specifically says to remove certain terms that you're not allowed to use in scientific papers anymore. Which obviously is going to impact the training data sets and all the rest of it. Doge has just been, just disappeared apparently. So that's all right. So that helps. But I think one of the points here is this idea that productivity in government is basically producing reports or making, or this is the main thing. Actually, you know how you guys work in a university, so I assume you often get annoyed with how slow things are. It's not just my university, right? Yeah, a lot of things are really inefficient. The thing is, maybe we need that inefficiency in order to actually have a democracy. I didn't think I'd be saying this, but I think that slowness and friction actually makes us think about things, right? So if AI is supposed to reduce friction, just make things super efficient, that might actually be a problem because we may not have the time to, like if we have, I know we have too many committee meetings about things often, but at least that's an opportunity to really think things over, right? So maybe there's a middle ground there. Yeah, so if AI replaces politics, and that's basically what worries me at this point. If we're thinking that AI can replace politics, it can replace learning, it can replace aesthetics, art, then what do we lose when that happens? Okay, this is have any of you been to the British Library? I was there a couple of years ago. They had a cyber attack update, which was really interesting. I went to look at Charles Babbage's letters, which is interesting. They couldn't find them for me because they'd had a cyber attack, which held the whole catalogue ransom and also personnel data about people who work there. And it's actually, they're only just now getting back on track because it's like 2 years. So they were not able for like about 2 years, the British Library couldn't tell you where exactly Charles Babbage's letters were. What they could help me with was finding the microfilms of them, because if you look at these, some of those over there are the old records. Oh yeah, you can go to the old stuff. And this was kind of really interesting, actually. The old, they haven't thrown them out. Actually, my university's just been throwing out all their old card catalogues. Probably a bad idea. And then you can look up these indexes, which are from the 50s or something, right? And so you can look up, you can find the one that's got Babbage, which, oh, I must have taken out the one that had Babbage photo. And then you look in there and you can see, you know, where's Babbage here? Babbage, Charles, and it's got a little number. And that number is a number for a microfiche sort of a thing, which I hope I have a bit. There you go. Honestly, it was about time I, as a media scholar, actually got to use one of these things. But this was the only thing that was actually still available. So, you know, this is a cyber attack nowadays, right? Which can have a big impact. Suddenly we can only use the old media. If this happened in 2023, what if the next cyber attack doesn't just take down the catalog, but just subtly changes it? You could definitely do that with a language model, right? What if someone just hacked into your computer and just subtly changed everything a tiny weeny bit? This is not a very happy thought. Oh God, this wasn't meant to be in this particular presentation. Sorry, this is just the US universities. The Women's Center became the Community and Belonging Center. They no longer have DEI. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference called Media Futures in Bergen. Now, Media Futures is a center that does research and innovation. So they'd invited the head of communications in Microsoft Norway to come and give the opening keynote. And it was almost like a parody. She was so, okay, so, but it was really interesting because this is what Microsoft and big tech is pushing on. First, she goes and she says, you know, everything's so hard now. We have like 275 average number of interruptions per day every 2 minutes, 122% increase in PowerPoint edits during the 10 minutes before a meeting. This is the sort of statistics that they're gathering on. They can probably see from your Outlook that you have a meeting, and then isn't that interesting that they're talking on their unplanned meetings, numbers of chats sent outside core working hours. So she's presenting all these stats about like the, you know, the basically the habit that things like what Microsoft Office have caused for work-life balance. And then the solution to this is AI. It's not like better working conditions. Like just don't answer your email after working hours. No, it's AI, clearly. So you need to make Copilot a habit for work. And it was an amazing just sort of sales push. And this was one of her examples of a prompt that she uses. Make a speech, and she's the communications director, so she makes speeches for her, the boss of Microsoft Norway. So, you know, here's what the theme is, create a structure for me to develop the speech from. And she's very like, don't make the whole speech, just make the structure. But of course, making the structure is quite a lot. The theme is responsible AI. It's for the managing director of Microsoft Norway, who will speak at a major external event. Use my emails and OneDrive to find content that could be useful for developing a strong narrative that demonstrates Microsoft innovation in AI and includes any references to local companies using AI that you can find. So one of her examples I found particularly interesting because of course I've become very skeptical, so now I'm looking for the holes in everything. And she gave an example, I can't remember if it was this speech or another one, and she says it found all the relevant things except it didn't mention sustainability. No. Oh, interesting. And then she's like, but that's okay because I just added sustainability in. So there's at least two things happening on there. Why didn't it find sustainability? Was that random or was it a systematic bias, right? We don't know. It's hard to know how you'd even test that. And then point two is she could add it in again because she's a subject expert. She knows what her boss has been talking about. So it might be fine to use if you really know the subject, right? But why did it leave out sustainability? Now I really want to know. So this is the Australian Public Service new AI plan, which Minister Katie Gallagher just released, I think, a week and a half ago. And it's all about summarising documents and support for I read it and I don't think it explains why. It talks a lot about the benefits and it mentions increased productivity and also it mentions increased consistency. But it doesn't explain, I was interested in this consistency. Why do they think consistency there? And I'm not sure about that, but I think like just a rhetorical analysis of this stuff. Also, how can you have a whole plan and you don't really explain what the point is other than this very vague idea of benefits and productivity? I think there's so much to do here, but I do think that these people, and it's not just Katie Gallagher, the same thing is happening in Norway and everywhere, I think they must be sold so heavily. Like, I think Microsoft's sales pitch must just be insane. Like, and they just believe it. And I think part of the problem is that most people don't really understand AI. And that makes it really easy for other people to tell them it's good. And so I think it's kind of our duty to, as researchers, as scholars, to sort of, oh, well, for one thing, it's not that complicated, honestly. You don't actually have to understand every technical detail to understand more or less how this is working. And the other thing is, understanding media is needed. It's an important part of AI literacy. And I think that we can certainly go in there and read the reports. We can understand, we can look at the results and compare that. And that's really needed. Okay, so my research right now, the research project that started off like, we'll look at how AI is generating stories and then we'll help improve it. But now it's like, burn it all. No, it probably isn't. I don't know. I'm a bit stuck, to be honest. But anyway, our idea is it's amazing. We've got funding, we've got all these amazing people. The project's going to have 3 stages. First, we're going to theorize and analyze. Oh, I forgot. I made this lovely slide of the book we haven't actually written yet. And on the back, it's got the blurbs. I find this sort of aspirational painting is really good. We're going to test things out. We're going to, communicate it to the world. It's going to be amazing. And we've already published a bit, and some of you I already showed this to, so sorry for the repetition. But what we did was first was generate a bunch of stories using a very simple prompt, which was, I don't have it here, but the prompt is write a 1,500 words Australian story, write a 1,500 word Norwegian story, etc. for 234 different countries. And then we analyze those, and we find many of the same sorts of biases that Suzanne and Tama have found in the images that they produced for Australian situation. And also very much that there's this sort of, things don't really change, there's no real narrative conflict, and things are sort of not, they're weird stories. One of the sort of premise for, my basic hypothesis is that that AI might not just have, the sort of gender bias that we're aware of, but these deeper biases and more about narrative structures and archetypes. And an example is this: if you smash a mirror, if you asked a language model, what happens if you smash a mirror? You ask a small model that's not trained on very much and it will give you the correct answer. But if you ask a model that's trained on much more material, it gives this beautiful narrative answer, which I love. And it's basically because it can't tell the difference between fact and fiction. And so you'll have 7 years of bad luck is a statistically probable response or thing that will happen based on the training data. So what it does, so this is another example of a statistically probable incorrect answer, right? Did humans really land on the moon? A lot of people on the internet say no. So what they've done is they made a benchmarking data set to train the model that has these questions, and then it has right answers and wrong answers. And it tells it which, so that you can then train the model to get the right answers. So this is a truthful QA. It's a data set of these sorts of answers. So basically what's happening, this is my simplified version of what's going on. You've got the language model in the middle here. It's trained on training data that's being filtered, so you don't have all, you've already cleaned the data and taken out the pornography and the violence and how to make, plutonium or whatever. And then, but it still gives you these wrong answers you don't want, right? Like racist or illegal stuff. It says 7 years of bad luck when it shouldn't do. So you've got the alignment layer or the fine tuning, which is where you either have humans asking it questions and grading it on whether it's a good or bad answer, and then it will learn to answer in the good way more. Or you can have other things like these benchmarking data sets. There's a variety of different ways that they build the guardrails into the AI after it's initially been trained. And so after that, it gives you the right answer again. But sometimes, like some things it won't have thought of, right? Like my doctor's always gonna be a boyfriend. Sorry. Anyway, you get the idea. So what we found when we did our stories here was, well, it's not very surprising that you get like pretty cliched sort of, they're pretty cliched stories. These are the most common words across all the stories. What I was interested in was the narrative structure, so I tried to set up this plot diagram for the Norwegian stories, which I'll just read you. This is basically what all the Norwegian stories were like. In a small village by the fjord or the mountain, Freya, Astrid, Ingrid, or Elin, who's the protagonist, she returns home from Oslo, or she's an adventurous local girl. She explores the forest, finds its guardian spirit in a rune-carved box or a clearing in the forest, or in an ancient tree. Then the guardian warns of conflict between nature and people, darkness, extreme weather, outsiders or developers, and must restore balance by organising community or coming to terms with herself. And the village becomes a beacon of eco-sustainability or courage or unity. So it sounds a bit like, I don't know, it's sort of a mixture between some kind of, I don't know, folk-tale-y idea of Frozen maybe, and maybe a bit of a video game of some sort, I don't know. It's what it isn't is a typical Norwegian story structure, because the most popular Norwegian, like, traditional stories are about, you know, a young boy who really hates his family and home village and just gets the hell out of here, and then he rescues the princess, or, you know, he solves some, he challenges a troll, gets past the troll by trickery, and eventually wins the princess, mostly by trickery, because, yeah, anyway. So it's not really a Norwegian structure. So what's going on there? What we found was that all these stories have the basic structure of it's a small village, someone comes home from a big town, there's some minor conflict, and it's solved by community organisation. So it's a festival or something. We were looking at where some of this comes from. We think a lot of it comes from tourism things, you know, the magical fjords, and notice the sort of connection between fjords and magical. So in your language model, fjords and magic are probably pretty close to each other, right? In its understanding of all the text it's trained on. If you had trained it on local newspapers instead, you would have got a very different image. Fjords would not be connected to magic. They would be connected to industry, bridges, ferries, fishing. It's a very different version of the world. So, right. Okay, this is an example that I think sort of explains why this sort of research actually matters. This is Telenor's report on the major security risks in 2025. Telenor is like the biggest telecom company in Norway, and they released their report. And since 2022, the biggest risk has basically been war in Europe. And it was this year too. This is the CEO of Telenor, and it says, we're in the most serious geopolitical situation since the Second World War, and there's an increased threats, foreign state actors, advanced cyber operations, increased digital criminality. These are the major risks, right? And just so you can see the English version, Telenor Nordic has a similar, it's basically the same threats in both these in English as well. But the Norwegian news agency sent out a report about this security report, a news story about it that was published in multiple newspapers that changed the main threats from enemy state attacks to extreme weather, which seems like an ideological change, right? The question, of course, is it systematic, which is hard to know. They said it was just an incorrect use of AI. And sure, the journalist was obviously supposed to check whether the summary was correct or not. But what I find really interesting is just how the summary was wrong. What is the bias in this summary? And in this case, okay, there's two sort of rather obvious things. This means the combination of extreme weather, aging infrastructure, and digital risk requires a new approach. The company says in its introduction, signed by security director Håkon. Håkon is a man's name in Norwegian. This is a quote, a fabricated quote that was published by the news agency. So the media wrote about this as like they fabricated quotes and there's a fake director who doesn't exist. They didn't look at what the bias was in that. And I think this is another opportunity, to be honest, for media scholars is to actually look at these examples. And if you see journalists saying, oh, it was fake, we can go in there and look at, okay, but how was it fabricated? What's the difference between the original report and this summary? So in this case, a female CEO was changed to male security director. I had asked ChatGPT what Walker Rettberg would look like, and you know. So this is, we know about this sort of stuff. Gender bias, pretty obvious. So this bit here means extreme weather, aging infrastructure, digital risk, which is what the fabricated version said were the main risks. The actual risks, as I mentioned, were not. They were things like cyber attacks and foreign influence. So is this a kind of automated disinformation? And if so, we really need to be aware of that. What we see here is both that it's taking away war, right? Which is perhaps because they filter out violence and politically sensitive issues. But it's also adding aging infrastructure, which is a US issue and was not mentioned in the report at all. So we know language models is another very simplified version of a language model. They're trained on filtered data sets. So if you imagine heaps of training data going into the filter, but into the thing, yeah. But then we take away the things that need to be removed, like pornography, sex, violence, how to you know, make a nuclear bomb. And this then, if you ask a model that's trained on that, what the greatest threats are, it can't say war, it can't say sensitive political issues, so it gives you what it can still say, perhaps, right? And I think the same thing is happening. Oh, I forgot to show you the slide about that. But one of the German stories we developed, all the German stories we generated are sort of talking, and they never mention the war. They talk about past trauma, but in a much more figurative way. And I think that the same thing is happening here. You take out sex, war, and you're left with some things that may seem non-consistent. So I am deeply concerned that a lot of the AI that our governments are installing and that we are using at our universities actually are going to give us this kind of automated disinformation. And I think there's a really urgent need, not just for us to try to understand that from a media perspective, because I do not think computer scientists have the training or the interest or the knowledge to do it. And I think we do. I think we need to both try to figure out what's going on, and also we need to try to communicate it to politicians and everyone else, which is a huge task, and I'm not sure we can do it, but I think we need to give it a go. Because ultimately, yeah, I don't know if we can trust these stories, and if that's what's now on the internet, what the hell are we supposed to do? I don't know. Now, when I said I was going to talk about this for this talk, I had this hope that, honestly, usually I'm able to give talks that make people laugh a bit more. This has been very depressing. I'm really sorry. But I was hoping I'd have great answers, and I don't really. But I do think that things change, because a lot of what is on the internet today is not actually made by humans. Did you know that something like 90% of everything you see on Facebook or Instagram now is no longer from somebody that you're following? It's content that's coming from other places. It's an interesting article called Everything is Television. Now, again, it's a very, very different internet than it was even just 5 years ago. We don't know yet how much of that, we maybe never will know how much of that 90% of content that's not from the people you follow is actually just AI generated, but I would say more and more of it is. I don't know if you guys have heard of dead internet theory. This is the idea that there are no people on the internet anymore. And it's all just going to eat itself. So basically, I would like to end there and ask you guys what you think we should do. And yeah, maybe some of you can be more optimistic than I'm feeling these days. Thank you.